everybody to another author chat hosted by the Pamunkey Regional Library. I am Kate, your host tonight, and I am the branch manager of the Mechanicsville Branch Library. And today I am so thrilled to have debut author Evie Hawtrey with us. And Evie's new book, End by Fire, is a new one for her in basically everything. So it is a crime, mystery, suspense, historical. It's got a little bit of everything. So say hi, Evie.
Hey, everyone.
Why don't you go ahead and start? Why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, I am a recovering historical novelist, although I'm still a historical novelist under the name Sophie Perrineau. I'm also a recovering attorney, but I'm never going back to that. And I actually live in the state of Virginia, but north of everyone who's watching tonight, up in the DC metro area. So that's pretty much, I guess I've got 2 cats and a dog. Doesn't every writer have more pets than they can handle? And it's kind of exciting to talk to people in Virginia because in 2019, I was on a big book tour where we went live to different parts of Virginia, but now everything's virtual.
It is, yes. In fact, we met for the first time when you were on tour as Sophie for Ribbons of Scarlet, and we met in Baltimore.
Oh, yes, at the Baltimore Book Festival, which is just such a glorious event. That's a glorious event.
That was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun for sure. But I'm super excited to have you here as Evie. And the first question I think that I even want to look at is, why did you think you needed to create an entirely different persona in order to write in a different genre?
Well, I'm going to start with the flippant answer, which is that one crazy me is not enough. And I like the idea of living 2 lives. It really is. And I think people don't think about this a lot when you are not an author. But when you are an author, you do think about it. A lot of this is really branding. And I talked to my agent and he said, you know, Sophie is a brand. And when people pick up a Sophie Perrineau novel, they expect straight historical fiction, meticulous research, female-centered. There's not a mystery aspect or aspect. And he said, now you've got some timeline and we're going to get history, but the voice is very different. And that's the first time someone said that to me. He said, the voice is really different than your other work. And also, I would say probably the scales within the novel tips a little bit more towards the modern as far as how many pages, how many words it takes.
Sure.
And it does say in the front of the book what I've written previously as Sophie, but he said, you know, what you don't want is people to pick it up expecting that and get something else. So then I thought, all right, well, we could do this crazy thing. And so I did.
Yeah, because it's much more common, I think we'll find that people write with just a pen name when they go into a different genre or they want to explore something that's not, like you said, their typical brand. But you've created an entirely different person.
Yes. Well, but the good news is they both Sophie, who, you know, and Evie are still me. Yes. And that's the thing that was really interesting is we said, we're not going to make up things. We're not going to lie about anything. We're just going to emphasize different aspects of my personality. And I'm like, okay, so maybe Evie could be hipper. I mean, it could happen, right? I mean, I think my children would they would probably take some umbrage with that. They'd be like, no, you're not actually hipper. You just think you're hipper, which is just sad. But
we should have them come and talk.
Although this is, if it's my book, and I, of course, have the book sitting, I want to hold it up. But in the back, you know, there is a headshot of me. And my son took that headshot.
Isn't that great?
Yes, I did employ him as my brand manager last summer when he came home from college. And so I'm sure he'd probably be horrified that I told that about him. But since I haven't said it.
He's fine. Once he gets employed on these adventures, it's all bets are off.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But it was exciting because when they said, do you want to credit the cover photo? And my initial thought was no. And I thought, well, actually, he did an awesome job and he took a lot of pictures. I should give him credit.
Yeah, and it is a great photo. Because photo sessions are not.
I said, I'm not trying to look sad. I'm trying to look pensive because somebody the other day said, why do you look so sad? I said, no, it's supposed to look mysterious. I guess when I'm mysterious, I look sad.
This is the first book that you've published by yourself, whether as Evie or as Sophie, for a few years now. What made you decide that this was the time to embrace both Evie and this story?
Well, I'm a folder keeper. I'm sure a lot of authors are. I have folders and am notoriously something I saw in a footnote about the Cathedral of Notre Dame eventually led to my first published work. So when I see ideas or I hear ideas, I tend to jot them down and put them in a folder and then wait for them to percolate into something, because I know they're going to be something when I hear or see them, but I don't know what they're going to be. So some years back, I was listening to a discussion on NPR with a historian, and it was about the Great Fire of London. There's a female historian, can't remember her name, and she was saying that, of course, we all know the fire is accidental, and I definitely embrace that in my book. It's terrible that they hung somebody for something that was an act of God. But then she said this, and she said, well, but you know, nobody benefited more from the destruction of London from this terrible accident than Christopher Wren, because he wasn't anybody. He was an Oxford professor. He wasn't a celebrated architect yet. And he got to rebuild London. And I was like, So then I started looking at it and realizing he'd been sitting for 2 years already on a commission. And he was the junior person on that. The most popular architect in London at the time was on there. And he'd been sitting on this commission for 2 years about how they're going to restore or rebuild St. Paul's. And he is absolutely convinced that St. Paul's needs to be pulled down. So that was sitting. And for a while I thought, well, maybe I'm going to do a historical novel set completely in 1666. And then one day I just heard Nigella, and I just had this idea. What if I challenged myself to do a dual timeline where you have crimes past helping to solve crimes present? And if I really was a little bit more foresighted, what I didn't realize is in order for these crime scenes to be where they are, they need to be Wren located. The first crime occurs at the foot of the monument, Christopher Wren's monument to the Great Fire of London. Well, there are two police forces in London. The London City Police, they police 1 square mile out of this massive metropolitan area, but they've existed forever. And the what we normally think of as the London Police, which is the Metropolitan Police Scotland Yard. So I kind of, by making my main detective and my heroine part of the city police, it means almost everything she does is going to be multi-jurisdictional because it's so small. But that necessity came from understanding the jurisdictions and understanding where the crimes are going to be. And I think it's going to be fun because I do hope to continue the series. And my modern team, I intend them to stay the same, but the history is going to be different. It's not even always going to be London. And so I just guess I'm at the stage of my life where I could buy a sports car, bad idea. I could divorce my longtime husband, worse idea.
I don't think he'd approve.
No. So I'm kind of viewing this as almost like a midlife leap of faith in myself that isn't a crisis. And I don't want a midlife crisis. What I want is something exciting, and I found this very exciting.
Now, you had mentioned in different interviews and on your book jackets and earlier that you were a lawyer.
Yes, it was.
And we won't touch base on that too much, but did that help you at all in trying to understand the differences in like the English system as opposed to the American system?
I honestly, it helped me more. First of all, I think what the people don't realize, because you have to write very effectively. I was a litigator, and if you're going to write briefs and try to convince something, you're going to write arguments, you're going to stand up and make those, they better be convincing. So you have a facility with language that I think people don't think about. But I sat on a panel at Malice Domestic in April on police procedurals. And I said, I think coming at this from historical fiction, I had a big advantage. And everybody on the panel just looked at me like I was crazy. And I said, listen, historical novelists know how to research.
Yes.
We know upward, downwards, right ways, left ways, how to research. And do I research different things now? Yes. Some of them are, I actually have a heading on my blog. One of the categories, search engine, is scary. And if you ever click on that and you see the blog posts that come up, you know I'm not lying. So
you are not.
But I think the techniques of research that you develop as a historical novelist serve you in every capacity.
And I think people don't really realize and or appreciate the amount of research that historical novelists do. So it is fiction because of the character development, because you can't always know what they were thinking, what they said, XYZ, right? But the events are there. Right. And I think people forget that, yes, it's a historical fiction work, but there's so much, there's years of research that goes into a book sometimes.
Right. And what's interesting is in this case, I had to have a lot of maps that predated the Great Fire because you had 300 plus acres of London burn, had over 13,000 homes burned down. You had over 100,000 people made homeless. Well, street names were changed when you rebuilt London. And interestingly enough, in the copy editing for this, my copy editor corrected a couple of street names. And I had to say, oh no, I understand why you think I mean this street, because the street I am referring to doesn't exist anymore. But I said, I know historical writers. If I don't get the street names right, if I know historical readers, I'm going to get about 15 emails saying, talking about a street that didn't exist in 1666. So you do have to know things, and you have to know things that don't exist anymore, which means you have to approach it through research. Because yes, I can drop myself in on Google Maps in front of the Great Fire Monument and do a 360. And for the modern, if I want to check something, that works. But for 1666, you have to come at it completely from research.
One of the things that I both loved and hated about this book, because you know me, we've been on the social media trip for a while now. I am a self-proclaimed historical fiction geek freak, and that's fine with me, and I'm okay with that. And I loved this book because it kind of made me explore something else. But what I loved and hated was Ren.
Yes, he's a man I love to hate too, because I think that there's a theme in the book that I didn't realize. There's a couple of things in the book that I didn't realize. I think people think authors know everything going in, and they maybe other people do. I really don't. And I didn't realize how much I really did want to look at the question of what do we sacrifice for art, and this concept that we see, not just see people in life crossing the between self-sacrifice and sacrificing others because they think there's a great good here, or they think what they're doing is so important that it's okay to hurt other people to do it. And I did want to really look at that. And I think Ren is a visionary, but I think like a lot of visionaries, he's also pretty full of himself, and that's the way I played him. And I was very honest in my author's note about what's fiction and what's not, so I'm not embarrassed about it. I think he made an interesting person for that reason. And Etienne is real. Lady Margaret is not real, but Etienne is real and actually appears. There's a scene in the book that I won't do a spoiler completely, but where you'll know what I'm talking about, where some people after the fire confront him. And because he'd been at his shop and he'd said, if I don't get this powder for fireworks before this date, it's going to be useless. He actually did make that visit, and someone did report him and said, I think he lit fire to London because he was making this big deal about where was his gunpowder. And so Etienne is a real person. And Lady Margaret is kind of an amalgamation of people who would have served the Queen, but she's not a real person. So, which is good, because that was the other thing that was so surprising to me is in the modern timeline, I get to make people completely up.
Yes.
There's something almost giddily liberating about that.
I was just going to say liberating, sure.
Yeah, right.
Now, did your view of Ren change? Because you obviously, we talked about the level of research that you would have had to do. So both the before Ren, before he was successful and after he built everything up, did your view of Ren change with the character that you created him to be in your book?
Well, I don't know about that so much, but I will tell you who I got kind of interested in is Nicholas Hawksmoor.
Yeah.
Because I found out he was forgotten by history, even though he rebuilt a lot of churches after the fire, and he studied with Ren, and he kind of got erased for a while. And there was quite a fierce movement in the UK, really adamant people who wanted restored back to the historical record. And I was interested in some of the things he designed because I wasn't very familiar with him. And he actually did appear ago, and I can't remember the name now, in a historical novel in which he was villainized, and I think he may have been a murderer. And that seems unfair. Of course, that's the beauty of fiction. You can do that.
You can do whatever you want.
I got more interested in him, I think. And also, I guess I'd never thought about Christopher Wren pre-success. We all have a pre-success period. And I think there is something very fair that his friend says to him in the book, where he says, look, he's talking about the most popular architect. And he said, I don't understand. How could he be this popular? You know, he's not that good. And he's driveling on about fixing up something that the Roundheads used to stable their horses and do it. And his friend says to him, well, obvious why he's wildly popular. And this huge sums of him built, it's in everybody's interest to say how great what he does is.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, that's true. Sometimes people get famous for being great at something, and sometimes people get famous because they're a trend or they're a fad. And I think we remember Wren because he really was talented, and we don't remember this man who was more famous than he was at the time because he didn't really leave that big of a lasting mark.
Right.
That might be a little unfair, but you know what I mean.
It is what it is. History isn't fair. So, you know, I mean, one of the things that you just mentioned, though, which is going to be a springboard for me, is success. How do you measure your success in this business?
I view writing as a glorious transition for me because I practiced law. I was good at practicing. I am not the excellent DC who's going to say this to you. I found practicing law to be soul sucking. And one of the things I decided was whatever I did next, I needed more control of my life and hours, more satisfaction. And I'm sure you remember this from when I first started writing. I left law without knowing what I was going to do next. And my sister, I was angsty sister because I can't ever angst to this day without my sister. And she said, listen, I know you're writing in your head right now. 30 to school, 30 minutes back, days a week, stories to the we walk. And she said, you are writing something in your head right now. Maybe you ought to try writing it down. And this was just, I was kind of to do, and that feels successful to me. Before I sold my first manuscript, I had a friend who's a visual artist say to me, well, what are you going to do if this book doesn't sell? I said, I'm going to write another book. And he said, what are you going to do if that book doesn't sell? And I said, let me just cut to the chase on this with you. I'm going to write books till I personally am tired of writing them. And that's kind of how I've approached this. So from that measure, I'm most definitely a success.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I mean, and your first book was The Sister Queens, and it came out in 2012.
Yeah.
You then joined the History 360 group and came out with A Day of Fire, and then followed that up with Medici's Daughter, which was, you know, a singularly written book, and then Ribbons of Scarlet, of course, again in 2019. So you've kept the burners going since you started on this endeavor.
Yeah, and that was really my goal. I mean, that was really my goal, to keep doing something that I love. And I feel very privileged that readers have let me do that, because nobody can, I mean, I wasn't being facetious when I said I can write for myself. That's not the, it's really reader book come alive. It's readers, every person who reads your book reads it differently. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how other authors feel about that, but I find that so fantastically exciting. And periodically someone will come to me and say something, and they'll have had an insight into my book, and they think it's intentional, and I really planned that, and I didn't. And it's very exciting. And so they're going to see things in situations that they even see yet. Might be the most exciting of all.
One of the things about the new book, And by Fire, is that you're promoting, you have a different spark about you when you talk about this book.
Yes, I do.
You are very excited with this one, and it shows in everything that you write and in every interview that you do. And I want to know, how far do you think this is going to go?
I don't know. I hope I can keep doing it. I am a leap of faith person, so I am writing the second book right now. I'm enjoying the heck out of it. I keep saying to people, well, if you want the second book, you have to buy the first book. But I feel like I've really bonded with Nigella in a way, and I like the idea. One of the things that made me sad about my other books, even though I love them, is my family actually knew to avoid me right after I'd finished the first draft because, yes, you're going to edit. But it's like someone's died. Those characters are never going to speak to you again. You're going to change what they said. You're going to alter what they said, but it's not like you have them on an answering machine. You could play their message over and over. Right. You're going to stop hearing them. And for me, that's very painful. So the idea of doing something where the main character, I don't necessarily have to stop hearing, that's very exciting.
Well, and why do you think you've bonded so much with Nigella?
I think we have a lot of things in common. So if people hate her, they probably wouldn't want to have drinks with me.
No coffee with you.
No coffee with me. I think coming from law in particular, at the time that I was in it, and I think when I was in law school was finally when women were 50%, and before that they hadn't been. And the idea that she's had to work very hard. First of all, she comes from an Oxbridge family, and they didn't really want her to do police work. They wanted to do something more highbrow, but this is what she wanted to do. But it's also a field in which, even though, yes, we're in the 2000s, the 2020s now, women still have to perform 110% to be seen as competent as a man who's doing 75%. So she's running hard. I've experienced that. And also, she's smart and she's independent. I mean, we do have a difference in one way, which is she has a phobia of relationships because they tend to get in the way of how driven she is at her work that I don't have. But I also gave her things like the fear of fire that she has in this book. And if people read the book, they'll see the incident that sparked it, because I can't resist a pun. That is something from my town and my childhood and the evening news that I saw when I was way too young to see it, and I could never unsee, and that led to my own personal fear of fire. And I don't know what I thought I was going to achieve by giving it to her, but I feel like I did achieve something, because there's a moment in the draft that I'm working on now where someone says, my current partner wears perfumes with smoke notes in it, and that's odd because she's afraid of fire. Well, when I'm writing Nigella, I only wear two of my perfumes, and both of them have smoke notes in them. And I had never made that connection before. So I think she's a hipper, younger person that has a lot of characteristics I have, and I respect her, which sounds crazy, but I respect her as a person.
You created her. It's entirely acceptable.
Respect her, yeah.
So in addition to writing the second book, which Beta Rita, hello, right here. When do you find time to read on your own? Because I've learned from doing lots of author chats and social media and stuff that in order to write, you need to read. One kind of goes hand in hand with the other. So what are you reading right now?
Well, that's interesting because I read whatever genre I'm not writing, usually. Now, that's not entirely true right now, because when I sat on the panel at Malice, I loved the other panelists, and I immediately went out and bought a book that each one of them had written, because I hadn't read anything any of them had written. So right now I'm reading mystery books by people I sat with on the panel at Malice. But normally when I'm writing historical fiction, I read anything that's true with crime, because I don't want voice bleed. I don't want characters. But right now, because I'm drafting, I've actually got a book here that I'm reading, and it's nonfiction, and I'm not going to recommend it to squeamish readers. I'm currently reading Russian Criminal Tattoos, Encyclopedia, Volume 1. And that's illustrated, and the fact that so many Russian prisoners allowed themselves to basically be photographed naked so that these tattoos could be cataloged is pretty overwhelming. And I do nonfiction. Say right now I'm reading, but they're not my kind of mysteries. So I'm reading a kind of a cozy mystery that I'm enjoying about written from the point of view of a mystery writer who is now the chief suspect in the death of her agent. And this author understands exactly what it's like to be a writer and says things that just laugh out loud. And I'm reading a book written by the person who moderated our, who was a police detective in Maine for 27 years. So that's kind of a grittier, and it's an American setting, and mine's not an American setting, so I'm not worried about the voice bleed there.
How
And
has
I have a huge pile of I have Edgar winners and Agatha winners on my pile, but you know what? This is the first time, Diamond Eye is the first Kate Quinn book I wasn't a critique partner on. So next up is Diamond Eye.
So good.
So yeah, good. I know it's going to be good. That's beyond that pale.
So good. How have the historical fiction writers, y'all have your little groupies, you guys kind of follow each other around, right? How have the mystery writers and the crime writers embraced you as a new author into that world?
Well, I only really got to see them for the first time. That's the one thing I didn't think about, which shows you I'm a planner, but I'm also a pantster, and this part was obviously pantster part. I have had, even before I was published in historical fiction, I went to the first Historical Novel Society conference in 2005. Mm-hmm. I never missed a conference except the last virtual conference. I had a long history with people.
Yeah.
I signed I think the deal notice for this book came out about 1 year before the book came out. So I had 1 year to totally reinvent myself. I don't think I have that many connections yet. I'm making them now. I met a lot of people at Malice and everyone was fantastic. But that is the part I underestimated, is how deep my roots go in historical fiction. When I go to a conference, I'm going to be in baggage claim and see people I know. Yeah. I'm going to get to the hotel and see people I know. And it's going to take a while to get there in this genre. And maybe that is something I should have thought about ahead of time.
But the support is great and the networking is great, but it just shows that it's not necessarily needed. It's wanted, it's desired, it's how you get the word out, but it's not, you don't have to be so intrinsically immersed in the genre in order to publish a book and be successful.
Right. Well, I think you have to read it, and I've read it for years, and I'm also, which I'm sure you've seen the nods in the book, because O'Leary watches all the BBC stuff, and Nigella's always telling him, stop watching that. It's going to make you crazy. I grew up on that kind of stuff. So I both have read a lot. I grew up on P.D. James and, of course, Agatha Christie and the greats but also I watched so much, so many mysteries. How many episodes of Father Brown are there? Like 100?
Something ridiculous, yes.
Right. And I obviously don't write Father Brown style, but I think I had enough grounding in the genre, both in reading it and watching it, that I was confident about that. But you're right, when it comes to getting the word out, that's where having more connections would be better.
How many times did you rewrite this book?
That's interesting, because I did this book differently than other books. First of all, somebody said, oh, you must really plan. I said, well, this is embarrassing. I know who the killers are, and I know what the first murder is, and I know the motivation. But I actually, and I'm doing it again in this next book, there are times when I'm solving the mystery with the team. So in the current book, I've killed 3 people in 3 weeks. And if Nigella and I don't get a break on this soon, I'm not sure how we're getting from point A to point B. And I literally walked into the kitchen to refill my coffee, and I said to my husband, I need a break on this case before someone else dies. And he said, that sounds ludicrous, because you are killing those people. You're killing them. You no more have to die if you don't kill them. But so that is kind of different. But I also, this one, and I'm not doing that with the one I'm working on now, I wrote the entire modern timeline first.
Okay.
Beginning to end. Then I wrote the entire historical timeline. Then I did the agony of cutting them together. And then I had to adjust the modern timeline to fit. But because I wrote the modern timeline first, I knew pacing-wise where I needed certain things to happen in the historical timeline.
And I think Stephanie Dre did the same thing on her recent book. So, wrote the different timelines and then piece them together.
Right. And I'm not doing that the second time around as of now. I'm doing it somewhat, but not as much. But I think I am not a dirty first drafter. A lot of people are. I'm not. So the first thing I'll do tomorrow is read everything I wrote today And then I'll go on from there to get re-immersed into the skin of my characters, into the time, into the place setting, into the cadence of the voice of the book. But I always used to say to my agent, and I'll tell you why I stopped. I said, if I drop dead tomorrow, you can take my first draft out on submission. And he said, now that you write crime, you need to stop saying that.
Yeah, like, you can't do that.
That's right.
Tell me about the title and the cover, because both are so recognizable with the plot of this book.
Well, I got really lucky. I'm going to just grab the book. Hang on, because I would have, so people could see what we're talking about. If I'd been smarter, I would have put it on my desk. But the cover is gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. And this was the first cover they designed for it. I mean, almost nothing got changed. They sent me this, and I opened it up, and I just went, because they've got the map of London, you know, from the 1700s. It's on fire. You've got London in the background. I love the dark blue. I just really love this cover, and I'm never going to stop loving it. And anybody out there who's an author as well as a reader will know this, but readers won't know this. If you're super famous, if you're a New York Times bestseller, you get quite a bit of cover control. If you're not, you don't necessarily. And this was so perfect. I didn't really feel like I just felt blessed. The title is interesting in that I am terrible at titles, genuinely terrible, but I actually did come up with this title. And it's because there is a very famous story that is not in the book, but Christopher Wren, when he's redesigning St. Paul's, he's pacing off and he finds a piece of stone that says Resurgam, I will rise again. And when he redesigns the cathedral, on one of the transepts, Phoenix with its feet in the fire, it says Resurgam. So I took And by Fire from the And by Rise again. People rise. Mistakes and adversity, and in the case of St. Paul's Cathedral and London, from total destruction. So I probably will never have another title on a book that was completely my idea and that everyone's like, yeah, that's a good title.
It was, you know, I mean, it's almost like, you know, all of the stars aligned for this to be successful. You know, you had the great first cover, right? You got the title right. You know, the persona you've truly embraced. And the book is now out in the world, and the library is waiting for their copy. Shipping delays and all that are still not over. So
I know, and that's hard because you hate to have readers want something and not have it. And that has definitely been not just me, so many authors during this last 2 years. And I can't really think of anything worse than that, because like I said, it's when authors get my book in their hand, that's like Christmas and my birthday rolled into one. Yeah. So if that's delayed, I'm like, but no.
So do you think you'll be able to go, you said you're working on the second book in the Nigella series. Do you think you'll be able to go back and forth between Evie and Sophie simultaneously? Or do you think there'll need to be like a split, like, okay, this book is done, let me move on to maybe historical fiction again? Like how much of a break, or how far do you think you can go before you need a break?
Well, I can switch between the two, but I don't think I could do both at once. I love, so I mean, no disrespect to this, because I read it, I love it. I love the historical fiction that is popular right now, the era that is popular right now, from the 1890s, the Inner Warriors, World War II. Ironically enough, my undergraduate degree in history, I wrote my dissertation on women in the Second World War.
Well, there you go. Publish that and call it a day.
But what's interesting is when it comes to writing fiction, that's not an era that does it for me. So I think do I have some ideas for straight historical fiction? Absolutely. And I have some I'm very excited about, but I'm also not a newbie. And I know now, which I didn't know when I started, you've got to look at the market. And my idea is this is maybe not the time for them. The minute I get the slightest hint that the eras that I'm interested in with my new ideas are selling again, then I will write a straight historical fiction. And I might just stop and write one anyway, just because I get in the mood to do that. But I also felt like if I was going to try this, if I was going to try this genre jump and hope the parachute opened and then I wasn't flat on the sidewalk, then I have to give it a fair shake, and I have to give it my full attention and see if I can make the landing stick.
So have you gone out and bought like an entirely new wardrobe?
My son bought me some things, but for the pictures, yes, we bought some things because, I mean, obviously, Evie has to be Evie, but that's actually kind of exciting too. We wear the same glasses. These are the glasses all the time, but yeah, when I went to Malice, it was great because I wore one of the blazers that I bought for my photo shoot, and the minute I put it on, I felt like Evie.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, so much more oversized and much more, I don't know. I definitely think Evie might be hipper. I'll have to see if she drinks more when we go to
conference. And there we go. We're going to go into the fun questions now. I already know you're a coffee drinker, and you've already mentioned that several times. So obviously that's not a question to ask. Red wine or white wine?
Both. But I drink more red because my husband, I drink more red because for some reason my husband can't drink white as he gets older.
And I mention that because Nigella also likes a little bit of wine.
Oh, and she's a good pick. She picks good stuff. She really does. I would drink with her.
I think we all could drink with her. Cats or dogs?
Both. See, I'm a woman. This is probably why I have two identities, because I've got a Boston Terrier locked out of this office right now, and I have two cats. I think maybe I have a dual personality.
I firmly believe you do, yes. Well, I'm looking to see if there are any questions coming in. Ironically, my own daughter has also volunteered as tribute to be a beta reader. So there you go.
Oh, that's good.
But I'm really excited. I mean, Sophie, you and I have talked about, you coming and doing an author chat for me, and now here we are, and it's not in the way that you and I even thought it was going to be. So it's very exciting to be a part of this.
I think that day will also happen. I mean, I really do.
Oh yeah. You're not getting out of that quite so easily.
I sometimes get asked, so I will volunteer. This is a fun question. Who I would hang with. Would I hang with Nigella or Lady Margaret? I love Lady Margaret, but I will not go back willingly to 1666 in a time machine because it's apocalyptical. This week I was doing some research for a blog post that's going to go up about how hot the Great Fire got, because one of the things that amazed me is how hot it got, and I really wanted people to realize that there were fire tornadoes like there were during the firebombing of Dresden, and that one of the reasons there's such a low death estimate for the fire for years. I mean, historians now know it's low, but at the beginning they were trying to say 8 or 10 people died, and that's because it literally, at the vortex of the big fire areas, the temperature exceeded 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That's way more than you need to cremate people. It's way more than you need for there to be no teeth left. I mean, these are, reading about the Great Fire, I can totally see why people thought this was to do with there being 666 at the end of the year and with the wrath of God and the sign of the devil. This is just hellacious. So I think I would hang with Nigella because of the wine, because of the art, and because I don't have to go back to something that's apocalyptical, which doesn't sound like fun.
And she also finds kind of sexy men to hang out with. So,
I mean, and interestingly enough, one of the things that I firmly believe, and I mean, everybody won't be a fan of this, but I have to have fully realized characters to care about them. Like even in TV shows, I don't watch 100 episodes of Father Brown or all of the, or Jane Tennyson. I loved Prime Suspect. You don't just watch that because of the science and because of the crime solving. You watch that to care about those people. And I know some people are going to say, well, why do I have relationships in this book?
You have to.
People have relationships. They just do. And, I want everybody, even Nigella's superior officer, I wanted him to be fully formed. I mean, he's got 3 failed marriages because the job is his life. And, there's a scene in the book where he stops by his desk to say he'd forgotten his son's birthday, and he didn't mean forgets to send a card. He was supposed to be there at dinner and he was still at work. I think human relationships are part of everybody's life, and I don't want to watch things or read things that don't include those.
And that's a very, very interesting point, because again, this is my personal opinion, folks. Characters are more than just a name on paper.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get anything out of a story if a character is just a name on a paper. Like you said, the characters become more relatable when you as a reader can find things in that are relatable with that character. And
Well,
your voice is very distinct in this book, despite it being a different genre.
Well, I think the thing is also that you can definitely, that is a risk. One of the things I thought of after I did this book is I thought, I'm going to have some people who are team Lady Margaret, and I'm going to have some people who are team Nigella, and I'm going to have some people who, like me, love them both and understand they have similarities.
Yes.
And how they handle their interest in science, their sharp intellect, how they handled it is really impacted by the time periods in which they live.
Yes. They are perfect complements to each other within their time periods.
But I mean, I do risk the fact that some people will say, well, I just wish we'd had just this one person, or I wish we'd had just this other person. But I think that's a book somebody else could write. This is the book I wanted to write.
And you know, I think each storyline that you wrote could, in essence, have stood on its own.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
But like you said, it's your book.
Yeah,
you can do what you want.
Well, I really wanted to see if I could make a connection. And in the next book, I really set a hurdle for myself because, you know, now I've got to make another connection between historical and another. I need to sell this book so I can sell that book, because I've already got an idea for the third book that involves Nigella finally getting to go on vacation.
Ooh, vacation.
Right.
Well, I am thankful. I know that you've had internet issues all day long, so I'm very thankful that we were able to get this one squeezed in tonight.
Me too, because my husband was literally on with them, and they're coming at 8 a.m, and I'm like, I will drive to the parking lot of the Starbucks if necessary.
Well, again, the book is called End by Fire. It is by Evie Hawtrey. Pamunkey Regional Library will be having several copies available, hopefully soon. They are on order, but you'll be able to pick them up in the branches and also on Overdrive. And as Evie said, you can also purchase them, and she would be very grateful for that.
Yes, I would.
If you've got any questions for Evie, you can always just go ahead and leave them in the chat, and we will forward them to her. Other than that, everyone, thank you for coming. Evie, a pleasure as always.
Well, thank you for having me.
And we will certainly look to have you again when book number 2 comes out. Good night, everyone.